Hello and welcome to Corpse Club, the official podcast of dailydead.com. I'm your co-host, Bryan Christopher, and I've got a special treat that I haven't been able to enjoy in quite some time. I've got my good Canadian buddy, Scott Drebit. We're just doing a dynamic duo tonight. How you doing?
There is only good Canadian. There is no bad Canadian. That's total bullshit. There are a lot of bad Canadians. Sorry to disappoint you folks. I think I'm one of the okay ones. I'm doing well. Thank you for asking, Mr. Bryan.
Very good to hear, Mr. Bryan.
That is, in fact, your name.
Well, it's been a while, so we do need to remember what each other's names are.
That's true. It's been a minute, as the kids say.
So what brings us together, my good Canadian friend, as opposed to my bad Canadian friend?
One magical word: William Girdler.
Coming out swinging. This is why they haven't been putting us together for a while. And I'm sure that I feel like 30% of our listeners got really excited, and 70% of our listeners just went, "Who the hell is that?"
That's fair.
That is absolutely fair. William Girdler is kind of the king of niche, low budget filmmaking from the 1970s. Little bit of background on him for those who might know nothing about him. He was born in Louisville, Kentucky in 1947, started directing in his early 20s in his hometown, and he caught the eye of American International Pictures, who you might know from Mr. Roger Corman and just lots of people getting their start back in that very low budget but high production, high quantity, high volume, and a lot of really good gems, a lot of really good B-movie gems that came out of American International Pictures. And one of those folks was Mr. Girdler. He started working in some of the blaxploitation films of the day. So he got to work with some of the mainstays in the genre, like Blackula himself, William Marshall, Pam Grier. He definitely got his feet wet early, and cut his teeth on some really great stuff. And we'll be talking about one of those movies in a little bit. His later career shifted into killer animals with Jaws ripoff Grizzly, which we'll be talking about excessively, I'm sure, and then the utterly bonkers Day of the Animals. Oddly enough, though, when I talk about phases of his career, we are talking about a career that lasted all of 6 years. But during that time, he directed 9 movies. Can you imagine someone directing 9 movies in 6 years? We still are kind of blown away by the idea of back in the heyday of Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street coming out once a year. This is a dude who's just making movies, multiple movies a year, and was actually scouting locations for his 10th movie when he was tragically killed in a helicopter crash. So who knows what kind of output we would have gotten from this guy had he kept working. He was only 29, 30 years old, I think, when he passed away.
Yeah, he was 30, and 9 pictures. If I can have 9 movements in a week, that's an achievement to me. A prolific, but very much prolific, under the radar, very workaday kind of movies. These weren't flashy movies. These were even movies you could say that were following certain trends, piggybacking off of them. And but I think just because of his unique spin on them, whatever he was making, and as you said, we're going to discuss 4 particular Girdler gems today, from the time he started to the first one we're going to talk about in 74 to when we wrap up in 78, a whopping 4 years later. He's really, I think, grown by leaps and bounds as a filmmaker. And that's, I think, the exciting thing about introducing people to Girdler who aren't familiar with him is you get to see a filmmaker evolve in a positive way. And I mean, the reason we don't get to see his downfall is because of his tragic death at a young age. But, you know, we get to see a pretty amazing, I think, ascension so far.
Absolutely. And for all intents and purposes, for what we're going to see from this trajectory, like, he was still on the ascent. Like, I think he had his best stuff in front of him when he passed away. So we're seeing like a young up and comer over the course of his 6-year career. You know, like we said, he was 30. Like, he's still a kid when he passes away, and he's got 9 movies under his belt. Like, it's insane. And so it's very interesting to think about like what that trajectory would look like. And, you know, any director, obviously they kind of peak and they'll kind of go back down. So just interesting to think about, like, you know, what is there kind of a certain mystique to the legacy that kind of gets to stay almost like in that, you know, encapsulated and like fossilized almost because it didn't go any further than it did.
Well, I think, you know, at the end of the day, and with the dust, you know, being settled for over 40 years now, what you just have is just a life cut short, a life, you know, a talent cut short. And it happens, you know, it happens every day. Not to minimize what happened to him or his tragic life, but I think what's truly wonderful is he has left behind some really great B films for fans of the particular genre. And like I said, it's a little bit of it's fascinating to watch and exciting to watch a filmmaker actually progress, and you end up almost cheering them on. So, you know, at the end of the day, the tragedy, I think, is long laid by the wayside, and you're left with, you know, just a lot of fun, well-made, really fun, and eventually extremely weird films.
Yeah, I think weird is the order of the day for Girdler. I think he was unafraid to take a swing at just really off the wall stuff. You know, he definitely wasn't someone who played it safe. Like, he wasn't just doing a by the numbers thing. In some ways he was. You know, we're going to talk about how, like, 2 of the movies we're going to talk about are either cashing in on or directly ripping off, or a bit of both, of you know, a big studio version of a movie that came out before it. But within that path and kind of within that framework, he takes things to really interesting directions and does things with them that makes them his. And so while concepts may, you know, to the point where a couple of these you can't find, because I'm pretty sure the studio that they were ripping off said, like, no, you're not going to actually release that anymore. So while there's, you know, a lot of marketing similarities and brand similarities, I would say the movies themselves are very different. And so we'll get into that here shortly. We're going to be covering 4 of his, I think, more well-known ones. We're going to do a little sampler. We're going to do 1974's Abby. We're going to do 1976's Grizzly. We are going to do 1977's Day of the Animals, and we're going to wrap things up with 1978's The Manitou. Before we do that, Scott, do you remember your first encounter with Mr. William Girdler, or the works of Mr. William Girdler?
Oh yes, the works. Absolutely. It was, I was just thinking about this earlier today. It was definitely Grizzly. I'm having a bit of a hard time ascertaining whether that was in the theater or the drive-in, but it was one or the other. And I'm leaning towards theater just because the drive-in we went to occasionally, the theater I went to religiously. Because that
playing
was
the odds.
Yeah, that was like it was a 5-block walk for me in a small town. So yeah, that was my church, and I went there all the time. So I think I want to say theater. So yeah, the image that was ingrained into me at the age of 6 when I saw it was, of course, the bear being blown up by Christopher George with the bazooka. You know, that's cinema, as they say. Yeah, so that was my first encounter with Mr. Girdler. How about you?
I think mine was Abby. I believe it was for, and if it's for Abby, it was actually thanks to my dear old column catalog from the Beyond. Because I was doing, I think it was, I was doing a B cut for William Marshall, who, like I said, was Blackula, and kind of who he's really known for. But yeah, he had a supporting role in Abby, which is the ripoff of The Exorcist. But yeah, we'll dive into that very shortly, and about how I think in some ways it does some really interesting things that separates it from that makes it more than just a ripoff. But yeah, I think that was really my first dive into Girdler's filmography. And then I think the rest of them were probably because I found a fellow Girdler fan in you. And you're like, well, if you like this, then, I got a couple other ones you're really going to enjoy. So yeah, I think, and if I remember correctly, I think there were two things that kind of like bonded us. The first was Phantasm, which we've talked about that at length. But yeah, Girdler I think was another big one for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Abby for me was the second time, and still not knowing who he was. I mean, when I saw his work at 6, I didn't that was a William Girdler movie. When I saw Grizzly. Now flash forward 4 years, and we were picking out video, or picking out movies to have dubbed when we lived overseas, right? You can get like 2 movies put onto a tape, you pay a certain amount, right? Hey, listen, it's the way things were done. Okay. But I remember seeing the poster in their shop for Abby, and to a 10-year-old, that poster was like, whoa, that's pretty cool. That's a cool poster. So that was the second time, he was on my radar. And then really, it wasn't until between then and, again, connecting with you. And I think we have kind of stirred up a Girdler essence that's spreading, or should spread, the nation.
If it hasn't yet, I think this is going to.
If it hasn't, it really should. But his I think why you and I are sitting here is because his movies are just damn fun. The ones that we're going to talk about are damn fun, and like you said, there's some interesting ideas and an exciting progression of craft, and I think he really went out on a high note, because the Manitou is just one of my all-time favorite movies. And these are films that if you are a fan of B cinema and whether that's action orientated or horror orientated or a combination of that, if we may add, and we will, and we'll talk about them, a stable of classic B film stars, film actors, just an amazing stable. And even just these 4 films alone, if those were the only 4 that he made of the 9 in the 6 years, okay, I'm done with the math. I think it's a great film legacy. I really do.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. And I think without further ado, why don't we start digging into some of these?
Let's dill them. Abby,
1974.
Yes.
Directed by none other than William Girdler.
Yes.
Written by G. Cornell Lane, starring Carol Speed as the titular Abby. William Marshall also stars as, where did his name go? Bishop Garrett Williams. Terry Carter as Reverend Emmett Williams. Released Christmas Day of 1974. What a great Christmas movie this would be to see. Honestly, if I had a chance, like we always talk about, like going back in time and being able to see a movie for the first time, I want to go back to Christmas Day in 1974 and watch this movie. That would be amazing.
Yeah, that would be a good one to go to, because it surprised the hell out of a lot of people. Well, it didn't surprise, I think, anyone in the Black community who was given a horror film, a Black-led horror film, coming off the heels, of course, of the great William Marshall and Blackula. And but let's face it, there's one film that it, personally, I don't think it owes as much as others do. But yes, it was in theaters for 1 month and made, I believe, $4 million
off of $100,000 budget.
That's right. In 4 weeks, it made $4 million, and Warner Brothers had it pulled from theaters. Yeah.
Why'd they do that? What were they saying? It was
with cement shoes, and it's never been seen. It's never been officially released in any format. You can, of course, get it easily. You may even see it on YouTube. But certainly there are DVDs, bootleg DVDs out there. The one I have is called Black Exorcist Edition. And it's no better quality than any other version.
Yeah,
that's put out there, right?
And I really don't feel bad about pointing people in those directions, because there is no way to get it.
There's no way to get it.
Yeah, so you're not robbing from anybody, because it doesn't exist.
You're not taking from Peter to pay Paul, or piping any pickers at all.
If we weren't clear, this Warner Brothers sued their asses off because there are a lot of connections between this and The Exorcist, which had come out 2 years before at that point.
1 year. 1 year before.
1 year before.
Yeah. Exorcist was 73 and Abby 74. But I mean, it's not a girl that gets possessed. It's a woman. It's very, I mean, they're completely different movies. Like,
yes. Well, because I mean, it's kind of one of those things where it's like you could make the argument that any possession movie is ripping off from The Exorcist, which is not, just in the broadest stroke. So in this case, we're looking at there is this spirit, this kind of it is a Yoruba sex spirit known as Eshu, which I believe comes from Nigeria. and it's kind of like a trickster chaos god or demon of some kind, that's also kind of very sexual and sex forward. And so it gets released by Dr. Williams, played by the great late William Marshall, and comes over to, I believe, Kentucky. Yeah, Louisville, Kentucky, which again just so happens to be Girdler's hometown. So, wonder why it's there, and possesses young Abby, who I believe is the wife of the local, one of the local ministers or someone in the local religious community. So they're really pushing even harder, whereas with The Exorcist, it's kind of this high, this uptown, Georgetown neighborhood. Reagan from The Exorcist is the daughter of, a famous actress, and you're kind of really talking like these are very secular people. Whereas in Abby, we're kind of exploring this impacting a more conservative religious community.
And I think community is a big difference as well in the in the sense that Abby is about community and community facing evil, whereas The Exorcist is about family dealing with evil, right? So it's there's so much that's different, but the initial hook of the ancient demon being the ancient African demon being brought back to the Western world and infiltrating. But I mean, okay, so that hook is the same. But other than that, I think they're hugely different. It's just Warner Brothers being pissy. Let's face it, 100% pissy, right? Just like no different than Universal being pissy with The Last Shark. Same kind of idea. It's not going to dip into Jaws's revenue after 47 years, probably. Much the same as this one is not going to. If you would let someone remaster Abby from some kind of halfway decent negative, if someone has it out there, just release the rights, Warner Brothers. Do the right thing and let someone show you that has really nothing to do with The Exorcist, and it's let someone responsible for that movie, get some good out of it.
Yeah. And it's exploring such different themes. We already talked about, community versus family, which is also kind of ironic considering in some ways the scope is bigger at $100,000 than however many millions The Exorcist has. The Exorcist primarily takes place in like one room, whereas, you get a decent number of set pieces throughout the course of Abby, because it is a little bit larger scale. We're talking about a neighborhood here, not just a house. I think what I remember really, really liking about it, what was the most intriguing, was that it was playing on the fears of like empowered women sexuality. That idea that, when Abby is possessed, she becomes very sex forward and kind of obviously playing it to an extreme because she's possessed by this demon. They're playing it for scares, but I think just the general idea of a woman, especially a woman within the context of, kind of more conservative religious community, saying like, no, this is what I want. I'm going to like use your body in a way that is going to make you feel very uncomfortable. Watching that is, it's at the time, I'm sure it was being played as like, oh man, that's fucked up. Like that's really scary. Like, I hope my woman never does anything like that. Looking back on it now, it's like, good for her, grab onto that sexuality and, tell your man that you're going to get it how you want it once in a while.
Yeah, it is very frank. And again, that's springboarding off the freedom, I think, that people felt, or filmmakers felt, by mixing that profane with the spiritual, right?
Mm-hmm.
when you scream, let Jesus fuck you, and you're using a crucifix to jam into your vagina, you're making a, not terribly subtle point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think, that came from a big mainstream movie. So to allow filmmakers that freedom, low budget filmmakers that freedom to express and even take that further into, obviously we're dealing with adults here. So, you can and should explore that connection as an adult between, spirituality and sexuality. And I'm all for the, repressed religious woman, floats her skirt and finds a little salvation, if you know what I'm saying. It just makes for richer storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
And it's just more fun. Let's face it.
Yeah.
So that's just you bring up a great point about that movie and I think it deals with it in a relatively serious way. It's for an exploitation movie. It doesn't, to me anyway, feel very exploitive.
Yeah. It doesn't have like that mischievous grindhouse wink where it's like, let's see what boundaries we're going to push.
Yeah. It's not about that.
Yeah. But at the same time, I think part of, like you said, the word fun is part of what separates it from The Exorcist. The Exorcist is an amazing movie. It is not fun. No. I would say that Abby is fun because it's not doing like the winky exploitative, like boundary pushing, but it's just not as like, it's not as much of a drag as The Exorcist is.
Yeah,
like
no, totally.
And The Exorcist is trying to be a drag, but that's kind of, it's the point. It's a dour movie. And I love it. And just like The Exorcist 3 is a dour movie, but it's Abby is I think a lot more fun. And so
I would say The Exorcist 3 is actually a fun movie, but I know what you're going for. When you have Fabio in heaven with wings, can't take it completely seriously, but I 100% get what you're saying there.
But yeah, if any way you can find Abby, I think when I got it was on YouTube. I can't imagine they've done much to kick it off at this point because there's nothing that it's cutting into finance wise. So,
you know what? I honestly, I don't know if anyone's going to bat for it. Like if anyone with some deep pockets, or Jesus, I don't know. Maybe all it takes is an email to Warner Brothers to go, "Hey, would you mind letting the reins go on this one?" Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know how any of this stuff works, or if there is someone who's a big Girdler fan who's pushing to get Abby. Maybe there isn't a big push because, even as far as I think, Girdler fans go, Abby is probably not a favorite with a lot of people. And I get that because it's a little bit cruder than even jumping ahead 2 years later. But that's why we're starting with that, because you're at this juncture, you are getting crude, but you're getting very effective.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's kind of a good thing to kind of end on for Abby, in terms of like where we're going with Girdler. It's got rough edges, but you can definitely see there's something there, and it's got to shine. That talent has to shine through a lot of things, a low budget, the perception that this is just a ripoff, just the perception that this is just, a grindhouse exploitation movie, blaxploitation movie at that. The fact that like that brilliance still kind of shines through all that is really telling of what we're going to see from some of his later entries.
Oh, definitely. And then, so between Abby and the next film we're going to discuss, he made two? I think
something
two
like
films
that, yeah.
in between.
Yeah.
And I don't have them in front of us. So we go from Abby, which, as we said, made about $4 million in a few weeks, something to that effect. Warner Brothers had it yanked. And to this day, get your bootleg. Now, Mr. Girdler did get his revenge, though, because in 1976, he released a little film called Grizzly.
Oh wait, no. I can't do that for a lot of reasons.
We don't have. Yeah, we don't. Yeah, don't do that. So Grizzly is, of course, a Jaws homage, if you were, which is French for major ripoff.
And I would say if we're gonna like between the two, if we're gonna say one is more of a ripoff, I would say this is more of a ripoff of Jaws than Abby is a ripoff of The Exorcist.
150%. I could not agree with you anymore. If I tried, it's very much. But again, it's how do you quantify it? Well, there's many ways with Grizzly you can quantify it. Other movies, it's harder sometimes to spot the reference. Grizzly is, you could almost put tracing paper over Grizzly and Jaws and come out with the same films, just one on land and one on water. Grizzly came out in the summer of 76, and which is, of course, as you get by the title, it's about a giant bear, people, that kills a lot of people and terrorizes a bunch of people in the woods. Had
an even better return on investment, I think, than Abby did. Budget of $750,000, so we had a much bigger budget, comparatively. Came back with $39 million box office, which I guess
almost hit 40.
I guess is what happens when you get to go for more than a month in your run.
It was a huge hit. It was up to that point, and it held the record for a couple of years until Halloween came along. But it was the most successful independent motion picture of all time for a short time. But for that summer of 76, our boy Billy Girdler was really on. He really was
Billy Girds.
Billy Girds, BG, was really on top of the world, because Grizzly is not a high budget movie, but it looks like a solid mid-budget movie from the 70s. It looks like something you would see a Richard Widmark in, or a Richard Burton in, and they're maybe rescuing someone from a Nazi death camp or something like that. It's got that kind of look, that kind of polish to it.
But instead of Richard Burton, you get an actor who I much prefer. You get Mr. and this is the first of, I think, two collaborations he'd have with Girdler, Christopher George. Described as the great Patrick Bromley is a walking cigarette, I believe. That's
we may be paraphrasing.
Yeah.
This. It could be a game of telephone passed down, but Patrick was something from this movie, and the way Patrick said it, I was. It's completely accurate, 100% accurate. Christopher George is, as we said, this is where he starts to build his stable of actors. Now, when I say stable, you're talking about a couple pictures, but it's a good grouping of it's a good corralling of this specific talent, because I think for a lot of people, seeing Christopher George and Andrew Prine, who we just lost, and Richard Jekyll. Was it Mr. No Legs? Was that the movie he was in the 70s? Anyway,
you're asking me?
Yes, I'm asking you. Anyway, these were, I think, seeing them together in this movie was kind of a launching point for a lot of people seeing these actors, because this was at a time when these actors were in everything, whether it was, and we're talking crossing over from TV and B movies mostly. Jekyll, Jekyll would always, Jekyll. Is it Jekyll or Jekyll?
I would say Jekyll.
Jekyll, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Jekyll. Richard Jekyll would sometimes sneak into A movies in bit parts. But he was always a star in B, and the same with Andrew Prine. These guys were at that time, if you were, well, I mean, I couldn't consider myself a B aficionado at 6. I just I liked moving pictures, but that would have been my first exposure to actors who, I ended up watching from that point on, like, forever. These are some of my forever actors, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah, anyone who's listened to Scott or I talk for more than 15 minutes at a stretch know that, like, Christopher George is our guy. Like, we love anything he's in. And so this is, Girdler is kind of part of that stretch of movies where he's just playing Christopher George and doing a really, really good job at it. For those who are wondering, by the way, why we haven't talked about the plot at all, literally just replace the ocean with a national forest and a shark with a bear, and that's the plot. Just take Jaws and just make those two replacements. So it's people, it's summertime in I think an unnamed national forest. I don't even think they bother giving it a name. And people just start getting picked off by this giant grizzly bear. And, the powers that be don't want people to stop camping. So they tell, Christopher George, I believe, who is our trio? Christopher George is our Brody. Is Richard Jekyll, is he our Hooper, or is he the Quinn of the group?
Richard Jekyll?
Yeah.
Richard Jekyll, who wears the wool cap and the denim shirt.
I'm trying to remember which one was which. So that's what
he would be our Hooper. Yes, okay, he's definitely our Matt.
Yeah.
Even though his name's Scotty, he's our Matt. And Andrew Prine he's like a really laid back Quint.
Yeah, the closest we have to a Quint. Yes.
He's like, whatever, sure, yeah, let's go kill some bear, man. He's like super laid back, like, all right, let's go. I got my chopper, let's roll.
I think part of what's also interesting about this is, just like Jaws, this is a movie that really pushes that PG boundary. This is before, this is about a decade before PG-13 was a thing. So you could really, it went from PG to R. And so there was a much larger range of things that, you could do, such as in Grizzly, you could feature a woman's severed flying arm going across the screen and still manage a PG rating.
You can have a horse head fly through the air, not horse head bookends, an actual horse head, and still keep PG. Yeah. Flying arms. It's insane. There had to be so many movies in the 70s that the ratings boards, like, what they saw Grizzly. Okay. It's like Jaws. Jaws was PG. Could it be anywhere in Australia?
Yeah.
Just give it a PG. And like,
don't even watch it.
Who's going to go see it anyway? Right. Well, yeah, everyone.
If you release this in 1986, it's an R-rated movie. With the microscope that horror movies were under at that point, I'll bet they
Yeah.
do that then, and they're keeping a much.
Oh, sure. If Friday the 13th Part 6 has an R rating,
Yeah, right.
This has an R rating.
Yeah,
this would be an R rating.
This has as many dismembered arms as Friday the 13th Part 6. One, but it has as many. Also has maybe the death in it that is both the saddest and the most hilarious of any movie I've ever seen in my life. Where
Scotty,
poor Scott, and it's also true to life too. That's what makes it so like freaky. So, oh man, I almost don't. So if you're worried about spoilers, we're going to talk about, because I got to talk about it. I can't not talk about this scene. So, our heroes are doing what they can to deal with this grizzly, and poor Scotty, kind of finds himself in the crosshairs of this giant grizzly bear that mauls him, just absolutely like tears him a new one, and then like buries him in a shallow area. Like, this is what bears will actually do. They will take their food, they will bury it. I don't want to say in a grave, but they'll dig like a shallow pit and put it in there and come back to it when they're ready for it. And so they play this with, poor Scotty. He wakes up in this hole. He's just torn to tatters, but he's alive. He's made it. He's been through the worst he's going to get through, and he's come out the other side. And then there's just this giant eclipsing shadow that goes over him, and he looks back, and there's the grizzly, and he just gives like this, oh man, and he dies. And it's just like, you have to laugh to not cry at how just insanely
having a bad day. What's very Debbie Downer? It's the look on his face.
Yeah, that's what does it.
Oh man,
poor Scotty.
Yeah, poor Scotty. We know what it's like.
I guess that was the direction they took it, that diverges from Jaws just enough to not make it a ripoff and get sued back into the Stone Age.
It's weird that and you know what, and maybe that's I don't know, maybe a Spielberg influence or whatever that said, you know what, just don't be pissy about it. Like, come on, it's a killer animal movie, right? Like, yeah, they hew pretty close to characterizations, or closer than others have done. But I mean, how much variation can you put on it? I mean, James Cameron tried to have them, the fish fly, and it didn't work. So you can't really variate. Your basic story is going to be your basic story, I think, and I think someone was, and smartly so, is like, you know what, let them have their money, and because it can't be denied, it's an entertaining movie. Mm-hmm. It's just an entertaining thrill ride. It's and again, looking at the craftsmanship from Abbey to Grizzly, he always filmed in widescreen. Todd A.O., just gorgeous. He always would have this gorgeous footage of the mountains and everything, giving it a really big feel. Even if the money wasn't there, he was getting better at projecting a bigness for the screen to try to compete with everything else that was out there. And I just think it's, besides being a delightful homage to our friend Jaws, it's just that next exciting step on the ladder of seeing him progress from Abbey to this.
Absolutely. And I think from there, we move on to 1 year later, where if one animal is enough to keep your attention, then how about we just bring in a whole shitload of animals and have Leslie Nielsen go insane? And we're talking 1977's Day of the Animals, directed by none other than William Girdler, Billy Gertz, B. Gertz, written by William W. Norton and Eleanor E. Norton, and starring, once again, we've got Christopher George coming back in because I guess he wanted to tackle some animals as well. We've got Leslie Nielsen and we've got Linda Day George. And so we've got we're crossing from that just anomaly, kind of random one animal going after people for whatever reason, into that more environmentally friendly or environmentally conscious story where we're talking about a whole group of animals being affected by something that we're doing to the environment. In this case, it's the ozone layer getting depleted.
Ozone, man.
And so we're seeing the idea here is that increased exposure to UV radiation at high altitudes is making the animals go a little wacky.
The higher they climb,
making everybody go a little wacky.
That's right.
But the animals in particular are getting a little dangerous on the mountain. And so once again, we are getting a little of that Jaws flavor because we're talking about a kind of a tourist location, a place called Murphy's Hotel. It's an Alpine village in Northern California. And we've got Steve Buckner, played by, again, the great Christopher George. He's, what is he, like a tour guide or something along those lines? He kind of runs things at the hotel in terms of getting the guests out on these hikes. And we just have a premise to get a bunch of people out in the woods so that chaos can ensue.
Yeah, 100%. And it's a little bit of Jaws, a whole lot of mixed with, I think, a whole lot of disaster movie. Mm-hmm. Big ensemble, which he had a small ensemble in Grizzly, Day of the Animals. Again, he brings back some staples from Grizzly. He brings back Christopher George. Mm-hmm. He brings back Jekyll again as a professor. I want to say, professor, and
Professor McGregor.
That's right. And then he adds in Linda Day George, which, as people know, when you combine the Georges together, it creates a superpower.
Yeah.
A super George. As
B-movie Voltron.
Yeah, exactly. B-movie Voltron, and making it all powerful and all knowing. And essential to a B library. If it's a Christopher and Linda Day George team up, you automatically sign off on it and you get it. You have to. Mm-hmm. And this, I think, is the first one that I remember anyway, them doing together.
Yeah, I think the other big one, if I remember correctly, is Pieces. That's kind of their other big horror collaboration.
Pieces, and Mortuary they also did. Mm-hmm. But so there was also some other fine actors that he would use later, like Michael Ansara is in this as well. Andrew Stevens, who has never been a personal favorite of mine ever. That does not change with this movie whatsoever. And then there's a little kid in it who is supposed to be 12, but he looks like 40 in the face. He's like the kid from Burial Ground.
Yeah.
So when you watch these enough, you start looking at different things.
Yeah.
Right. Which is great, which is the power of short attention. I mean, the power of movies.
So yeah, I mean, for me, there's a lot of overlap just in terms of like the broad strokes between Grizzly and Day of the Animals. You know, we got people in the woods, we got people getting attacked by animals. You know, in this case, it's multiple rather than one. I think for me, the big, you know, we have the same protagonist in Christopher George. The X factor for Day of the Animals is watching Leslie Nielsen progressively lose his goddamn mind over the course of 97 minutes. He plays Paul Jensen,
Yeah, he does.
an advertising executive. Or as as Wikipedia describes him, where did he go to? Paul Jensen, Leslie Nielsen, an advertising executive and psychopath with an angry, derisive sense of humor.
Yeah, that's right, Hotshot. He does.
You know, and
it's oh yeah.
It's kind of one of those funny things where, you know, I think the idea that they're bringing out is that, you know, all of these tendencies were in, you know, are in us, some more than others, you know, in this, all it took was this little push to kind of bring out the worst in us.
Man is the most dangerous animal of all. Hotshot.
But yeah, for those who are used to Leslie Nielsen, you know, as Frank Drebit, Drebin. Yeah. Drebit.
It's my Uncle Frank.
Uncle Frank Drebit. Professionals, that's what we are. Frank Drebin, from the Naked Gun, and, you know, and from all of his different spoofs, who know him as like the big goof. He was not always that guy, and here he is not funny at all, beyond the kind of the incidental laughs of just watching him just go utterly bonkers. But he is a threatening presence in this movie.
He's playing it straight. Bless him. He's playing it straight. He's doing what he can to convince one that he's a tough guy. He's certainly an asshole. As far as the tough goes, I don't know necessarily, but I know.
I just feel like he goes shirtless very, very early, I think, in the movie.
He does. And it's leads to his downfall. but he does mean very well. He does sarcastic very well. Yeah, and then he gets all rapey, and I'm like, Frank, it's not you.
It's not fun. Yeah,
no,
it's not
Frank,
a fun
that's
performance.
Not you. And then he's like smacking Grandpa, the 12-year-old Grandpa, down, and
the 12-year-old Grandpa,
calling him little cockroach, and then he wrestles a bear in the rain.
He does indeed. He absolutely does indeed.
Say that again. He wrestles a bear in the rain.
Yeah. Leonardo DiCaprio, you know, gets an Academy Award for doing it in The Revenant. But not a single award goes to Leslie Nielsen for him pulling that off.
Leslie Nielsen
decades
got
before
Airplane. He got Airplane for it. So.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think, you know, if Day of the Animals is him like playing it super straight and menacing, you know, and then you have the other side where you know there's the Naked Gun, you know, I think, you know, the in between there, if you want to see a good blend of that, it's his character in Creepshow, that where he's towing the line between that very menacing and but also kind of very deadpan humor.
Well, and
he'd be known for eventually.
Plus, he gets to do it a little broader in Creepshow too, right? Because the tone allows for that. The Day of the Animals tone is, well, it's striving for straight and serious. And I literally just watched this before we were recording, because I was just flicking around, and I wanted to show Michelle I told her about the bear fight with Leslie Nielsen, and she said, well, you have to show me that, of course. So I watched Day of the Animals. It's, again, going up that competence ladder from Abby to Grizzly to Day of the Animals just a year later. Day of the Animals, the direction is more assured. It's an even better looking film. What I don't think it has that Grizzly has, I don't think it quite has that same hook or the same attention to tension that Grizzly does. Day of the Animals isn't frightening in the least, I don't find. And some of the effects are like really bad, like Birdemic bad. The one where the girl gets hit by the bird and she goes over the cliff. That's like Birdemic levels of special effects.
And yeah, doesn't quite. Funny enough, has a bigger budget than Grizzly did. It's 1.2 million. Made way less than Grizzly did. It only came out with a box office of 2.8 million. So yeah, something was missing on this. I do enjoy it. I don't think it has the same personality that Grizzly has.
It doesn't. If you
could trying to play it a little too straight.
Yeah. Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think if you transported Paul Jensen and put him into Grizzly,
well, that'd be another 10
motion picture.
That'd have been another 10 million right on
10
top.
10 million,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It would have double. It would have made 80. Would have made 80 mil.
Oh man.
100%.
Anything else about Day of the Animals before we move on to our last movie?
No. Again, I think it's technically a step up the ladder. Definitely. I think material wise, it's a little bit of a treading water. And I think the box office returns kind of showed that up.
Gotcha. Well, then let's move on one more year to his swan song, his unexpected swan song. 1978's The Manitou, which you could consider just calling The Appropriation, because there is a lot of borrowing from indigenous cultures for the mythology here, but directed by none other than William Girdler. Written by William
Speaking
Girdler.
Of appropriation, hey.
Also co-written by Girdler along with John Cedar and Thomas Pope, starring Tony Curtis. Yes, that Tony Curtis, as along with Michael and Sarah, Susan Strasberg, Stella Stevens, John Cedar, and Southern, and Burgess Meredith.
What a cast. I have a DVD signed by Stella Stevens of this. Yeah. It's let's just lay the cards on the table. It's a little bit of banana pants, this movie, even by 1978 standards.
And I'm going to let you go ahead and give the synopsis for this, because we were talking about it before we started recording, and I'm like, how the hell do you even describe what this movie is about?
Let's give it the old KISS KISS treatment. Keep it simple, stupid. Okay. There's a woman who has a cyst develop on her neck, the back of her neck. And this cyst, it turns out to be, is the reincarnation of a 400-year-old evil shaman that begins to grow and develop on her back. Her ex-husband, who's also a phony psychic played by Tony Curtis, discovers that this is in fact real and must seek indigenous help to fight this 400-year-old shaman, fight shaman with shaman, as it were. And it leads to all kinds of dire, solemn moments, like Susan Strasberg topless on a hospital bed in outer space shooting lasers, or a hospital freezing up while a little person shaman shoots lasers. And it's just, when they say they don't make films like this anymore, this is the kind of movie that they're talking about. This was a movie that played in theaters and drive-ins, and you could take your best fella or your best gal to go see, the little Micmac have a Star Wars battle in outer space with Susan Strasberg.
Everybody got that?
Everyone got that?
Yeah, this movie is absolutely bonkers. It is it defies description in a lot of ways. Beyond the fact that I would say that for everybody talking about how brilliant James Wan was for Malignant, the Manitou did it decades earlier.
Yeah.
And yeah, it gets into a little bit of some of the mythology and some of there's a few icky parts of it where they're borrowing from the mythology of the Manitou, which is a life force from the Algonquin peoples. Added to that, the fact that their quote unquote Native American character, John Singing Rock, is played by Michael Ansara, who is Greco-Lebanese of descent. So, it's the tried and true 70s method of someone who is like vaguely dark skinned stepping in for an indigenous actor.
I will, you're 180% correct. But I will say, having gone that route that they did, I think he brings, as opposed to, we've all seen numerous just horrible depictions. I think he brings a lot of dignity to the role, and he tries to portray it as like it's not. It is certainly no caricature or anything like that, and he doesn't play it broad or wide. I think it's a really good portrayal. Of course, it should have been. But I think, having taken the role, I think he does the best he can to imbue it with a virtue.
If we're going down that inherently flawed road, he's at least not doing the over the top caricature performance.
Yes,
he's not bringing in the how white man shtick.
And least. I'm not going to, fault him for putting bread on his table.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, and again, this was certainly not an anomaly in movies of that era. So, you're going to see a lot of that in movies of the 70s and probably up through the 80s and 90s as well.
Absolutely. And it shouldn't be, and it should always be, it should always be discussed.
Mm-hmm.
If it makes someone uncomfortable, we'll find out why.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's there to be. Things being what they are, all you can do is study them and learn from them and move on from them, and try to find, as it is with a lot of these things, you have to overlook. If you want to enjoy something, you have to kind of, I guess, do it on. You have to find terms where you're acceptable with yourself for and with enjoying something.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the same old discussion. You can be critical of the things you love.
Absolutely.
You stop loving them.
Absolutely.
If you can, and I also 100% get, if you can't get by that, it's in a lot of ways pretty egregious. So like, if it's something you can't get around, I understand it. But if you can, it will get you to one of the most amazingly batshit insane finales that I think any movie ever has had in the history of celluloid. And I'm going to let Scott describe this, because it is, again, I think beyond my comprehension to even put into words.
Well, and again, and memory being what it is, and it's been a minute or two since I've seen it, but basically what you have is, once Susan Strasberg gives birth to the Manitou, as he is, she right. So they're in a hospital with a lot of machines that go beep, beep, right? As Monty Python.
Yeah. You have the machine that goes bing. Yeah.
That's right. Okay. It just came to me because how could I forget? Silly me. Because, and again, speaking of egregious, right? Using totemistic symbols and mythology and whatnot to tell your little spooky story is, yeah. Anyway, she's able to harness the power of machines because there's a lot in the hospital. And she battles the Manitou, as I said, on her hospital bed, which is now in outer space, with the hospital being torn apart in some kind of crazy space-time continuum, Muppets in space kind of thing. And she's on a hospital bed in space, and she's shooting lasers, and the Manitou is shooting lasers back at her. So he's, bless his heart, as they say in the South, bless his heart. He's trying to meld some horror and some sci-fi together.
Have we mentioned she's naked during all of this?
I think earlier I mentioned she was topless, but yeah, she's essentially, her dad, Lee Strasberg, did not teach this class at his acting school.
Like, honest to God, this was something that, like, I feel like William Girdler just kind of went like, how many different elements can we bring in that would like bring in traditional teenage boys? Like, okay, we're going to have laser beams. We're going to have monsters. We're going to have outer space. We're going to have boobs. Like, just a grab bag that he shook up and just like, this was what came out.
And I'm even thinking like, and no offense to Susan Strasberg, and she is a lovely lady. But was that like a teen audience in 78, Susan Strasberg?
I don't know.
I would have thought by 78, if you were getting Susan Day topless, then you might have had something, and she would have been legal by then. So everyone stopped screaming and yelling. The point is, William Girdler was a genius because he tried to blend horror and sci-fi together in a very traditional way. He took the horror and he moved it literally to outer space and made it a battle. I haven't read the book. I cannot speak if it varies.
God, I forgot that was book. Based on a book.
Oh yeah, yeah. Graham Masterson, and I don't know how closely it hews to the written word. I'll have to look into that, but if it's anything at all as batshit, and again, let's go back to that technical thing from Abby to Grizzly, Days of the Animals. Again, a year later, 78, slick. The movies are getting slicker. All of a sudden, he's getting bigger actors, and this film has a big scope as well to it. Again, it's a good looking movie. It's just incredibly strange. It's like watching an episode of Eight is Enough in the 70s, and then like an alien lands in the front yard or something. It's just like something so mundane at first winds up. Like we wind up, we go from a tarot card reading with our shyster, Tony Curtis, who, by the way, I think is really quite good in the role, and energetic and lively, and a lot of fun.
Yeah, he's not phoning it in here.
He's not. He's having a lot of fun with it, and it's a good performance. He's great, but yeah, it opens with him giving a tarot card reading and ends, like we said, in the heavens somewhere, and
which I think is oddly fitting. Like, this was not supposed to be Girdler's last movie, but as his last movie, this is certainly the most epic and the most ambitious of the ones that he's done. This
Most
is not
ambitious. Yep.
This is not a small movie. Like it's a low budget movie, but it's not a small. You can't call a movie that ends with a laser fight in space, a small movie. And so it's in a way you appreciate that. Like if this is the one that Girdler's going out on, it's the one that is, I think, the most, I don't know if sophisticated is the right word, but the one that has it shows the evolution of what he's been doing.
Well, yeah, that's that's why, because we have that full stop at the end of his legacy, that we can sit back and look at this. And it's just, I'm happy to say that I think it is his best movie that he went out with. Day of the Animals was a step back from Grizzly. So I'm glad that Day of the Animals wasn't the last movie he made. I'm so glad the Manitou is, because what we've talked about with this movie, there aren't a lot of movies that have a lot of these parts together or separate. Any which way you want to kind of mix them up,
So he ends on his best note. The Manitou is your favorite. I would say, I think it's the best made movie of the ones that he's done, or the ones that I've seen. I think my favorite is actually the earliest one I've seen of his. I think Abby is still my favorite.
Oh,
just because of all the funky, interesting things he's doing in that movie, and taking, and honestly, I went back and looked at my piece on it for Catalog from Beyond, and I do fall into the trap of pointing out how familiar it is to The Exorcist. But with time and the more I've thought about it, and where you really think about what's going on in that movie, the basic premise is the same, but just the things he does with it are very different. And I think that it's the one that, for all the rough edges, I think is the one that is still just the most compelling for me. And that's not to say, Grizzly, Day of the Animals, Manitou, love them all. But, I think Abby just has something a little different in it that I enjoy.
See, that's great, though, that your favorite is the early one of this bunch, and mine is the latest one. Yep. And there is no wrong answers.
Nope. And I think we're getting to the tail end of our Girdler homage, but I do, first I want to, if you haven't seen any Girdlers, even for those who have listened to this and heard the spoilers, it's not going to ruin your experience. Not knowing what happens is not key to enjoying a William Girdler movie.
Oh no.
Watching his eccentricities and his fun twisting of tropes, I think that's his legacy. He takes things that are familiar and takes them to very different areas, and does really fun and interesting things with them, partially by necessity, because he's working for AIP and they're saying oh, this is what's big right now, work within that realm, so we need to do something that starts familiar because that's what's going to draw people in. But he does those things to make it his own. So I think doing that under a very journeyman schedule is kind of his legacy.
Yeah, I think that, and tying into that, just a workhorse who I think who really loved making movies. Obviously you don't want to die for them, but at least we can look back and again, this is only just under half of his movies. We just picked these ones because we think, as far as horror goes, these are far and away his most successful films. But by all means, check out the rest. The Manitou for me is just going to be great always, because Bryan, you kind of alluded to it. There's a kind of poetry to it ending in the stars. much as it did for William Girdler himself. So yeah, there is no wrong answer as to what is a favorite Girdler. I think is well, I guess probably my big takeaway from our discussion today.
Absolutely. And we want to hear from you on that. Like if we got some fellow Girdler fans out there, let us know what your favorite is, either from what we've talked about tonight, or if there's one that didn't make our list. We're not doing this based off of the ones that we necessarily think, this wasn't a ranking by any means, or if we excluded any, it just didn't happen to make it in our discussion. So if there's any other ones that you want to give some love to, hit us up, let us know. You can do that at Daily Dead on Twitter and any of our socials.
That's right. Like 3 on a meat hook.
Well, on that note, we want to thank Bryan, our engineer, for helping us out each and every episode, making us sound good, or as good as Scott and I can possibly sound. As always, we want to thank our listeners, including those who have signed up for a Corpse Club membership. Make sure you visit corpseclub.com to check out our latest episode. You can also sign up to become a member, which will get you access to bonus episodes. You'll get a membership card, t-shirt, some good stuff there. Don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Every rating and review helps us out. You can also find us on Google Play, SoundCloud, and all of your favorite podcast providers. If you want to get in touch, you want to tell us about your favorite Girdler at however many words you want to, you can reach us anytime at contact@corpseclub.com, or on Twitter at Daily Dead News or at Corpse Club, and on Instagram and Facebook under Corpse Club. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay scary.